It's the Galilee and an area opposite the Jordan. And this thing hanging up here in the no man's land, where we are now, facing Damascus, goes to his other son, Philip. We call this Philip's territory. It's an area that is neither comfortably Jewish nor in-your-face Gentile. It's sort of find your own way. The headwaters of the Jordan River, right about here, this green dot I put on here is where we're now located. Name of the place. Have to figure out the name of the place. During the time of the Old Testament, the Israelites in the northern kingdom were settled up as their northern spot at Dan, where we just were, on the other side of this low ridge, with the water spring at Dan. Yeah, big powerful place, and it becomes sort of a holy ground, and under the influence of Baal and the Asherah, kind of a fertility god and goddess ground for the Semites in the area. Between the Testaments, as these waves of Hellenism and then Rome penetrated into the land, a new set of deities was coming with them, yeah? Or maybe the old ones under new names. Maybe that's all it really is. This spring, it wasn't like it was empty, nobody here, but it was not claimed by Baal. And so the Greek god of nature and kind of fertility and growth, like where we are, woodlands, set up shop here, the god Pan, P-A-N, the god Pan. In the cave that you see here, in those days, the water that's now coming out down below came out of the mouth of that cave. Seismic activity has lowered the exit hole. And all along the rock face here were built grottos and little holy spots, you know, where you would do your thing to Pan in order to ensure fertility for yourself and for your crops and for your herds. If you were Hellenistic and then Roman, this is where you would go. The locals then called it the Pan place. Panias. P-A-N-I-A-S. Panias. Today the Arabs interchange the B and the P, so it's Banias today. B-A-N-I-A-S. That's where you see it on the maps today. Panias, it became if you were, for whatever reason, Hellenistic or Roman, and wanted to feel at home in a landscape that looked a lot like the rest of the Mediterranean, with the interplay of the water and the vegetation and things, like it looks many places in Turkey and Italy and Greece. If you wanted to maintain your home belief, you'd be attracted to a place like this. This is your Rome away from home, yeah? If you're there, coming here. Or your Greece away from home, if your name is Dino, all right? This is the spot you want to be. It's comfortable, what you're used to. Politically, once Rome took over, it was under the authority, under the control of Cleopatra. And she gave it to her friend. Likely he was more than a friend. But she gave it to Herod as part of his kingdom, and it marked the northern end of Herod's control, as Mount Hermon always does, between an Israel thing and a Syria thing. So it kind of fit at that northern border. Herod, close to here, about 2 miles off, built a temple to Caesar, the divine Caesar, Caesar Augustus, to welcome people coming into his kingdom. Yeah. Herod named the place after Caesar. Yeah, if you want to ingratiate yourself to your boss, build a city and name it after him or her. In this case, Caesarea. Yep. In this case, Caesarea. If you want to ingratiate yourself to your students, build a school and name it after yourself. There's one of those in Tulsa, I think, right? And others, right? Anyway, Herod, it's not the only one, actually. It's not the only one. Herod the Great, Caesarea. There's one on the sea as well, right? On the other end of his kingdom. After Herod died, this came under the control of his son Philip. So Philip won up the compliment. Let's call it Caesarea Philippi. Caesar and me, yeah? As a buddy. And he started building here, turning it into a polis, a formal Greco-Roman, Hellenistic, Roman worldview urban center that would be a Rome away from home. Very much a place where Rome's life can very much feel at home here in an otherwise Semitic and dry Middle East. Caesarea Philippi. Herod's grandson, Agrippa I, imported marble to build here. First marble in the country was Agrippa I. He started building here palaces and things about the year 40, 41. And in the year 70, after the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, the conquering general Titus invited Herod the Great's great-grandson, Agrippa II, to come up to Caesarea Philippi and see the end result of Rome's power. Herod Agrippa II was the last Herodian hope. During the Great Revolt against Rome, rather than try to intervene with Caesar, rather than try to intervene with the high priests, he sort of stepped back a bit and let the country fall into war, revolt, civil war as well. And to thank Agrippa II, in a way, Titus said, thank you for not interfering. Now Rome is in charge. Titus invited Agrippa II up here, Herod's great-grandson, to watch Judean captives basically be thrown to the Colosseum against each other, against gladiators with wild animals. It was Rome away from home. And Josephus ends his book, War of the Jews, with Agrippa II, the great-grandson of Herod the Great, sitting up here looking at Rome victorious, imperial victorious. You didn't want to become one of us. We're forcing you to become one of us in the Colosseum. Rome is one. Josephus ends his book. Now, this place has a reputation, doesn't it? This place has a reputation all over the place. It's not even pretending to be Jewish up here. Don't even pretend, yeah? And we have this place with that kind of identity, a place, well, let me ask you this. Let me put it this way. With that kind of an identity, is this the kind of a place where you would expect a Jewish Messiah wanting to round up the lost sheep of Israel to walk into? The guy who goes about the synagogues and Jewish villages doing good. It's a bit off route, maybe. You know, where do we have Jesus going into a big urban Greco-Roman city in the Gospels? Does he go to Sepphoris? Does he go to some of the Decapolis urban centers like Hippus, which is right on the lake above En-Gedi? Does he go into Tiberias, which was a new center founded by Rome, right on the lake? Nowhere. A lot of folks say he walked into Caesarea Philippi. Matthew says he went to the district, the region of Caesarea Philippi. Not like in town, but close. Scholars debate that. Doesn't he want to get his feet unkosherized by going in? Is he worried about what he's going to eat? A lot of suggestions are made as to why he's not in the urban centers, and why Paul was specifically pretty much only in the urban centers. But he comes up here to the vicinity. You know, I don't like to put him like under this tree, but somewhere in the vicinity for a reason. Walks right in. Earlier I mentioned, maybe you didn't catch it on the bus, that phrase, sea to shining sea, where you have the Mediterranean, which is the Greco-Roman world, internationalism, and the Sea of Galilee, which we're starting to see, and we will see tomorrow, as also an international body of water. But Jesus hanging out in the Jewish towns and villages. And then at one point choosing to not go to the small villages where he had been going, like Arbel and these other places, but to go right into the heartland of everything that Rome stands for. Yeah? And this is Matthew 16. Jesus comes into the district of Caesarea Philippi. Somewhere out there somewhere, but close enough that everybody knows where he is. Yeah. You know, the lights of the big city are close, right? And he asks questions. We've seen him do this before. You know, why did you come? What can I do for you? Who do people say the Son of Man is? He says. He's a little bit setting them up. I mean, he knows who the Son of Man is, but he's wanting them to say. John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. Let's get the data out there. When I was in PhD school, we had to take courses from a certain professor of Hebrew and linguistics who had a reputation of being very, very, very tough. Very tough. Both in grading and in personality. The only way I survived that class was we sat around a square table. I sat right next to him. So I would look eager, and he would kind of recognize me, right? A very tough guy. And to kind of cut through the softness of his students, he would do this. If you would ask a good question in class, all right, he would say, good question. When we meet next week, you come back and you give a paper on it to the rest of us. All right? So this one fellow did that, and he got reams and reams of stuff that he was going to present, and was so interested in the topic that he was presenting. You know, he was saying, oh yeah, you know, Kaufman says this, and Katsudo says that, and Spicer says this, all these scholars, right? About this particular topic. And the professor was getting more and more and more angry. And this guy was looking at his notes. The professor was looking at him, getting more, and the rest of us were looking at the professor. Like, now what's going to happen? And he finally says, I don't care what these other guys think. You're doing a PhD by now. I want to know what you think about it. You know, it's about time you had your own opinion. You know, what do you think? Now, I don't know that Jesus was yelling at Peter that way. But the point was, I don't really care what the other people think. Doesn't matter what everybody else says. Peter, I want to know what you think and why you're here. You know? When I called you around that sea, you didn't have to come. But you did. And I want to know what you think. And he says, you're Messiah. And Jesus says, you're right. He says, you're right. All right? Maybe I'll have more to say later. Maybe I'll have more to say later. Yeah? Yeah.
I hope so.
Is there a Colosseum here there where they did some stuff?
More of the city is down that other direction.
Okay, but it was in this general area.
It's in this general area. It's in this general area. It was in this general area.
Finish
What
the
do you
story.
think? Okay. All right. Messiah is the title that we've talked about already at Nazareth. All right? Lots of people are popping up wanting to be Messiah in the first century. Lots of people acted like it in the Old Testament time. And we saw in Nazareth, not all were of the same quality and type, and not all were very effective. In fact, none of them were effective in the end. And the model that most people wanted Messiah to be in the first century, in Jesus' day, was one that was going to toe-to-toe with Rome. I wonder if some of the disciples were also hoping that that was going to be the case. Are you going to finally bring the kingdom in, they say, when he's on the Mount of Olives going up to heaven? At this point, you are Christ, Messiah. Jesus says, you are right. All right? And this is not flesh and blood that told this to you. You have that sensitivity, that awareness, that absorption of the Spirit. My Father in heaven said it. And I'll tell you what, Peter, Simon, let's call you Peter. On this rock, we're going to build my church. This is one of those instances that you were talking about at Dan with when the Baptists say, whatever the Catholics say, we'll say something else, right? And so, it's the Pope or it's anything but, right? This debate. All right? Let me ask you a quick question and then tell you what an observation is. How big of a concept is church in the New Testament, the whole New Testament? It's a big deal, right? Book of Acts is founding it. Timothy has instructions as to how to run it. Book of Revelation has 7 of them, kind of not so good. What about in the Gospels? We have community that we're building. Where does the word church show up in the Gospels? Right here. You are Peter. Upon this rock I will build my church. One thing I find interesting is that the word church, which becomes so important out here in the larger world, the mixed opportunity, the huge... Jesus doesn't do it in Capernaum. He doesn't do it in Nazareth. He doesn't do it in... He comes here, essentially in the doorway, the gates of the Roman Empire, to introduce the concept, to state what's going to happen. And number 2, he does it either next to or within sight of... What do you call this big thing in English? This thing that goes up, it goes up 9,000 feet. It goes back 25 miles. This is a piece of it here. It's a mountain, and this piece of it we call a cliff, right? What do you call this back home? This is a rock. Yeah? A small rock. Pebble. Where I come from, this is, not very useful. My dad had to pull him out of the field so he could plow better. You put him on the ground to walk on. That was about it. Not very useful. In Israel, that's a rock. This is sand in Israel. Just little tiny stuff. When we think rock, we think this. We think this. On the one hand, we have statements in the book of Psalms saying, God is my rock. Same way Jesus said living water. This becomes an image of God. And the other thing is this. Think for a minute. We've talked about rocks slightly. This is the good kind. Good building material. Off of it erodes wonderful, fertile soil. And you can see the water coming out, the living water coming out. Good building, fertile soil for growth, and water like crazy. If that's not a picture of what the church should be, I don't know what is. All right? Maybe we'll sidestep the Pope and the anti-Pope conversation completely, right? And look for imagery rather in reality in the land and how rocks are used in the Old Testament that Peter would have known. There's life in this rock compared to other parts of the country. There's potential in this rock. It gives life and water to the entire country. At least the church ought to do that. Peter, we're going to do something. And Jesus says it in an area that is incredibly different and anticipatory from the other places that he's going to have been. All right? At least I can see that much. I'm sure there's a lot more. Peter had a choice to make. You know, he didn't have to be there. He didn't have to stick his nose out in front all the time. And he ends up being the kind of the linchpin. And he had to answer the question of sort of position and reason for being there. And this is a critical part for him. You know, 6 days later, there's a transfiguration. We'll be talking about that when we get to, or showing you that at the next and second to the next stop and last stop of the day. This is the farthest Jesus ever gets from Jerusalem. farthest he ever gets from Jerusalem. And when you track the Gospels now, two things are happening. First thing that's happening is, for the first time he says, I'm going to Jerusalem to die. He says it 3 times starting here. Second is, you can track him in the Gospels, and he touches every other place he ever went on the way. In one long 9 month, this is probably summertime, one long 9-month triumphal entry that starts with Peter's confession and that ends on the cross, in the tomb, out of the tomb. You can track, all right? The back of your Regions on the Run has 5 pages called Regional Outline of the Gospels that takes the event and puts it in a geographical location. Connect it as much as it can with time of the year. Use it as a tool to move Jesus through the land. And you can see that at this point, it's a critical watershed. Not only in the gospel narrative, but in the commitment of the people who have chosen to be with him. All right? You can't turn back now. You can't turn back. That's enough for me.
So, did you finish reading that part?
How far did I go?
Oh, there's a verse.
How far did I go? Oh, I didn't go that far. I stopped before that. Tag. You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. I stopped there. All right? And the gates of Hades, or hell, or Sheol, will not overpower it. All right? Well, keys to the kingdom of heaven. You've been given.
Is there more excavation? This is the general.
Hold on a second.
Okay, sorry.
We'll take questions because I think we need to unpackage this.
Okay.
Yeah. Where we are here, the site going up to the Temple of Pan, fertility, right? Yep. Is there anything more important in life than fertility? We take it for granted. The trees are going to blossom and give fruit, that put some fertilizer on plants, they'll grow. Most of us are going to have children when we want them. We take all of that for granted. But when it comes down to the most basic part of life, what is most important of all for the existence of humanity? Fertility. No wonder they worship the god of fertility. It's absolutely essential, as it is in the kingdom of God. Now, Paul, I don't know, but this is what I've always heard. This God, he kind of was very delicate.
I was
more
delicate.
German.
Sweet.
As you go up in the stall, as you go to the kiosks, you pass the dancing goats. Let your imagination go. Fertility. The dancing goats and everything else. And what we think about is the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. What are gates useful for? Protection. Gates of a city are to protect the city, not to keep the people in the city. They have to go out of the city to go farm the land. The gates are not to keep people in. The gates are to keep the enemy out. And yet, when you think about the church and the world, how often we talk as though we're besieged by the world. And the way Jesus talked is the gates of hell, and what are the gates of hell? I was told, and I don't know, that those are historically known. And the cave, where sacrifices were made, in front of the cave with the water coming out, that was known as the gate of hell. For me, that works. First of all, if the gates of hell, we're supposed to be storming hell, not hell storming us. And yet we have this as Christians, so often this mentality of protecting ourselves from the world. And I think maybe that's why Jesus came up here. I mean, who brings a bunch of youth pastors or seminarians to Vegas to ask them, what do you think about Jesus? Take them to a holy camp, you know. So that's the first thing that comes to mind here, because in my mind, this is the third most important site in all of the gospel. There's got to be Bethlehem, where the greatest miracle took place, the incarnation. We know it's Jerusalem, where the Son of Man was slain and rose again. What's the third most important? Right here. Because this is where we're confronted with the choice. Who do you say I am? None of that matters down south. None of that matters in the least unless we settle the question up here. That's what's so critical and so important. Tomorrow we're going to be baptizing in the Jordan. Some of you want to be baptized or remember your baptism. And what does a baptism commemorate? What is a baptism? It's a profession of our faith and identity. Jesus was baptized to identify with us. We are now baptized to identify with him, his life, his death, and his resurrection. And at some point, Paul, I'd love for you to do a study. The sea is where Baal lives. It's chaos. The Jews were afraid of it, but yet there's living water and we're baptized in it. There's some incongruity there.
That to death and up to life.
Yeah. And so, but why are we baptized? Why? Say it.
We're commanded to.
Why are we commanded to? Are we commanded to?
For the forgiveness
We're
of sins.
instructed to, yes.
For the forgiveness of sins and life eternal.
I think that's what all of us believe. That it's a personal salvation. It's the water that puts out the fires of hell with which we fight the eternal damnation. Paul said the other day, who did Jesus call and what was the criteria? Those he wanted to follow him. Do you remember playing Follow the Leader? What's the one thing you absolutely have to do in a game of Follow the Leader?
Do what they do.
Go where the leader goes. Doesn't matter how silly or where it is, how difficult, you follow the leader. So we are baptized because we have decided to follow Jesus. And it's a lot more than a song. It's easy to sing. It's a lot harder to do. So here's a place where we have to come to terms with not who do I think Jesus is. I don't think Jesus could care less what we think who he knows who he is. His Father gave him his identity. Now he's concerned that we recognize that. He doesn't need us telling him who he is. He needs us acknowledging to ourselves. Because unless we acknowledge who he is, we won't know what it is to follow him and why we're following. It's real easy to get into the Jordan River and say, "Ooh, I've been baptized in Jordan." And it's party time. Is that all it is, a commemoration? It's tourism? Baptism means I'm going to follow Jesus. And then, what you didn't read, if you keep going, Jesus says, if you want to follow me, because that's a passage immediately following, at least in Mark. Yep. To follow me, you got to deny yourself. Deny yourself. Man, we could talk for a day on what it means to deny ourselves. Because I think sin is any time the self rears its head. Anytime self rears its head, it's sin. And that's what gets between us and God and between each other. Any disagreement, or, well, not opinion disagreement, but any conflict, any relational difficulties, because self has reared its head. Any sin, if we're not with God, it's self has reared its head. Deny yourself. Pick up your cross. Follow me. Where are we going to carry that cross? Which tells me that if we're carrying the cross, our calling is to die. You don't carry your cross to a picnic. You don't carry your cross to a reunion. You carry your cross to Calvary. It's an execution device. It's an electric chair. There's only one place it belongs. And so when Jesus says, see, he gets to make up the rules. And yet we all sit and debate, and I think this, I think that. Who cares? What does Jesus think? What did he demonstrate? How did he live? Where is he going? Where do we need to go if we're going to follow him? And so when we talk about the importance of this place, is that is no longer in existence. There's no temple there anymore. It's gone. As of what, 3rd century? Anyway. But where's the church? Worldwide. If we're faithful, the church would defeat that place. If we're not faithful, we will not. We talked last Sunday about, or a couple of weeks ago, you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world. The two elements I can think of, two things I can think of that cannot help. It doesn't have to try. Light cannot help but to dispel darkness. There's not a bad candle. Well, that candle's no good. It doesn't put away darkness. It doesn't work that way. The slightest candle just dispels darkness. Is that why Jesus picked light? Is because darkness has no chance against it? What about salt? Have you ever salted something and said, well, that salt's no good? Didn't salt it. Never. Never. Salt always makes things salty. Always. 100%. So what Jesus is saying, if we acknowledge him and follow him and deny self for him and follow him, the world doesn't have a chance. And if there was a prophet to rise after Billy Graham, it needs to be a prophet that will start preaching to the American church. Stop building your own temples. Stop building edifices to yourself. Start being the church rather than building the church. If we simply are true to what we claim and what Jesus calls in the world, and we just simply live into it, the world will come to Jesus. The world will get salty and the darkness will dissipate. That's what Jesus is guaranteeing, and that's what we got to believe. And there's a reason why every church in the nation, denomination, and every group, the only growing group in the United States is the unaffiliated. That wants nothing to do with the church. And you know what their first complaint is? They're a bunch of hypocrites. And what did Jesus call all the religious people? Probably a dozen times in the Sermon on the Mount. Don't be like the hypocrites. And a hypocrite in the biblical times is not, well, he said one thing, did something else. No. He said he believes, but doesn't live it. To have a faith that you don't live into is hypocrisy in terms of New Testament. Hope I'm close on that, because Ray discovered that. Thank you. I'm putting it up on Ray. So that's my point right here. I think at some point in this trip, it's got to become more than a tour. This has got to be more than, oh, isn't this cool? And look at that picture. Look at this. Look at that. At some point, we have got to sit down and have Jesus ask us, okay, who am I to you? I know who I am. He got his identity at his baptism. He gets it right after the confession. He goes and receives his identity after it's affirmed by his Father again. He knows who he is. Who do you think I am? And what are you going to do about it? You're going to wave at me on Sunday mornings and go by your way? Or are you going to follow me? Because I'm going to go all kinds of places. And we're going to suffer all kinds of things. And we're going to endure all kinds of things. And we're going to be kind. And we're going to help. And we're going to make life better for others. And live into the love of God and spread that love. The book of Acts, Peter says, Jesus went about doing good. That's how Peter describes Jesus in Acts. He just went around doing good. Wow. If 2 billion Christians on earth just went around doing good, it'd be a pretty nice place to live. So that's my challenge to you. Thank you for the chance to kind of maybe preach it a bit. This is important to me and I think to each of us. Who do you, not what you believe I am. What does your life say I am? Maybe that'd be a better way to ask it. Who does the way you live say that I am? And the way we live has to do with how we relate to people. Okay? So, I hope a bunch of you get dunked by Ray tomorrow. Ray's our dunker. But I want it to be more than just, woohoo! Let's woohoo it. Let's celebrate it. It is new life. But it's not just fire insurance. Oh, hell, I'm going to heaven. Jesus didn't talk about people going to heaven all that much. He talked about a lot about people who preach the gospel, who cast out demons, who prophesy, and he's going to say, I still don't know you. So it's really about living into it right here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Let's
Go look at the gates of Hades.
wander down and look at the things, and then we had a question.
It's the word in passage that says here, we regard ourselves as sheep to be led to the slaughter. Is that in Hebrews?
That's Isaiah. Isaiah 53 talks about he went as a sheep to the slaughter.
And I think it's also quoted in the New
Jesus
Testament.
says, I send you
To the
out as
As
sheep.
sheep into wolves.
That as Christians,
Among the
we are
wolves,
to
yes.
regard ourselves
Yes.
as believers as sheep to be led to the slaughter, to death if that's what it takes, to be martyred.
Sheep serve. Wolves ravish and prey. Sheep only give. They give milk, they give wool, and they give meat.
Let's say 15 minutes, all right? We've got 2 more stops yet. This way, along the path we can go, look at the accoutrements of the pan worship, right?